Welcome to Noble Warrior. This is a place where entrepreneurs talk about what it takes to build and scale purpose-driven organizations. We're going to talk about mindset. We're going to talk about mental models. We're going to talk about actionable tactics such that you can take everything that you learned here and build purpose-driven organizations. My name is CK Lin, biomedical engineer, PhD, UCLA, turned startup founding team member that turned an idea to a company of 200 plus people, turned executive coach for founders, entrepreneurs, focusing on mindset and culture. My next guest, he's designed over 33 cutting-edge prototype flight vehicles, including the Virgin Galactic reusable spaceships, White Knight 2. And according to our mutual friend, he's one of the most interesting people in the world. He's also currently the CTO of the Angler Bot camera motion control. Please welcome Robert Kilo Morgan.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to start off by asking you about your Burning Man experience. You're a longtime burner, and you offer gifts of flights to people that go to Burning Man. Tell us a little bit about why you love Burning Man so much. What about Burning Man is just so compelling for you?
You know, it starts when you arrive and you get permagrin, and it seems like it lasts a week. And then you go home and the afterglow seems to last throughout the year. It's a remarkable experience that transcends what you could look up on YouTube. You know, the art is spectacular, the setting is really cool, the high desert. But the interactions one-on-one with people is so unique. People are so welcoming, gifting, inclusive, and it's not something you experience in what burners call the default world nearly as often. And it really, I think it changes you for the better. And it's kind of like a reset button. It's a great experience. I recommend it to anybody. It transcends any kind of socioeconomic, demographic, cultural thing. Just about anybody, I think, finds something at Burning Man that's somehow transformative.
Can you describe for us, if we were watching through your mind's eyes, like a movie, can you give us a moment where, like a highlight? If I say Burning Man, what movie comes to mind? Describe it for us, so that way people don't just hear about it. They're right there with you.
Yeah, it's very personal, where you constantly experience generosity and creativity just being directed in every direction at everyone. So I've been hanging out with my comrades at our camp, and someone rides up on a bicycle, a delivery bicycle with an insulated box, and he pulls out a couple of pizza pies and says, "Is this the Black Rock Travel Agency?" And we go, "Yes." And he goes, "I have a pizza delivery for you." No, we didn't order pizza. This camp their purpose is they set up a roulette wheel, put the names of camps on it, spin it. They have a pizza oven, and they bake pizzas all day long and deliver them to the camps that are randomly selected by the roulette wheel.
Wow.
And so what could be more enjoyable than someone just showing up and, "Hey, I brought you a present." They don't even know you. Then they ride off. There's no tit for tat, no quid pro quo. It's just someone providing a gift, to brighten your day. And you feel compelled to pay it forward, right? So there's no reciprocity, but you then become more motivated to maybe brighten someone else's day. And so everyone's going around doing nice things for other people that they wouldn't take the time to do elsewhere, that, they're preoccupied with their own agenda, which is usually, some sort of survival mode or solving problems. I'm lonely, I'm hungry, I don't know how to pay my taxes, my back taxes, what am I going to do about my mortgage, that kind of stuff. And so you
Mm,
kind of suspend that. So it's kind of like the fun of camp, but with the inclusiveness of something that's just completely unique.
mm.
I don't know. What do you see when you think of Burning Man?
I mean, there's so many different moments to
Yeah.
describe. But when you told me about the pizza delivery story, it reminds me of a very magical moment that my ex-partner and I were. So there we were in the middle of the night. Is completely dark, obviously, and we were cold. We were hungry. It was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We were walking back to camp, and it was just but out of nowhere, it's like in the middle of the desert, and you see a glimmer of blue LED light coming your way, and we're like, "What's that?" And before I know it, that cart, blue light all over, a stainless steel exterior, just open up like a spaceship right in front of us. And the people came out and they laid out a red carpet. They started, forming this chocolate fondue right in front of us. And then they started serving us chocolate fondue, strawberries, and fruits. It was very magical because you can see the steams on the side and the blue light, and then the red carpet, and then the chocolate fondue. And then so their gift to the playa, these are professional chefs, professional moving kitchen, going about and just feeding people randomly. And we were selected, and that they, in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
serve us chocolate fondue. So
And
it
there
was
was so
very
much
much
thought
fun.
and intention in that gift too, right? It wasn't just a trinket or a piece of swag,
No.
it was like an act of service
Yeah,
to
and these
complete strangers.
yeah, these are professional chefs, right? So
Yeah.
I was very, very moved in that moment because that was very magical and totally unexpected. And it was just us. It wasn't like a crowd of people behind us, which is we randomly selected the three of us, laid out, red carpet style chocolate
Right.
fondue. That was awesome. Yeah. Are there
Yeah.
other moments that
And
you
that
think of?
happens all the time when you're there, right? I mean, it's because everybody is scheming some kind of way to do something like that to, you know, expand your mind through some kind of interactive art or unexpected gift that just seemed like it's so appropriate at just the right time, just when you needed it. And I think it's because they've gone out there and experienced the same thing, and you like fantasize like, wouldn't it be great if this happened just now? And I'm sure that that's how they was the motivation. They went and fulfilled that so that others would have that aha moment, just so unexpected.
Were there specific art projects that has brought an aha moment in you and it actually perpetuated over time that you still think about it? It's a very pivotal moment for you
Oh
in your
yeah,
life.
there's a lot of powerful art out there. I don't know the names of the pieces of art. I don't recall them, but there's one that's a huge wireframe sculpture of a man and a woman sitting back to. I'm not sure it's a man and a woman. I've assumed it was a man and a woman sitting back to back, like sitting on the ground with their knees up. And then it's a wire mesh, and then inside are two infants that are reaching through the cages out at each other. So it's kind of like two adults that have had a fight, some sort of conflict. The body language is that they're back to back, but their inner childs, which are smaller representations and are opaque, solid sculptures, are reaching for each other lovingly. And that was a very moving piece. Another one I really enjoyed, some of them are just so mind-boggling because of the scale. There was
Mm,
a one year there was a Trojan horse that was made out of wood and enormous. I mean, like maybe 3 stories tall. The wheels were probably 15 feet diameter. Your eyeball maybe didn't even make it to the axle, and the wheels were made out of wood, just like laminated big timbers. It looked legitimately antique. And then they had costumes that they provided people that looked like something out of some Mesopotamia or something. And they had big jute rope that was, like as big around as your neck. And it took hundreds of people to haul this thing out into the middle of the playa, and then they burned it.
Wow.
The next day, like they hauled it out, left it there for a while. And it's just, they could have put dozens of, soldiers inside, just like the original.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of remarkable. Like, how did that come about?
Mm-hmm.
How complicated was it to bring that piece, that huge installation to the playa, the cost, the expense, the planning, all just for, for everyone's enjoyment and pleasure, and then to burn it, to just show the transitory nature of something.
Right, the impermanence.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. I mean, it was not something small that disappeared. It was something huge. And you'd think that much investment, they'd maybe want to disassemble it, bring it back the next year. But no, they just torched it.
So that's really interesting, because I'll share with you, before I went to Burning Man myself.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, it boggled my mind, right? Why would anyone, well, one, want to do that? Two, it's kind of ridiculous if you really think about it in a logical sense, right?
Right.
Then I was there, and then I actually are immersed by these beautiful artists, beautiful people, technologies, and experience the intentionality and the thought and the love that put into each piece. And then I get it. So what's your take about, again, right? The making art for the sake of making art and then torch it.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know your thoughts, because you're a technologist. You're also a burner. I'd love to hear your thoughts about their effort of making art for making art's sake.
So I think that, first of all, making art for art's sake is like the best reason to make art. And art is about communication. And you and I are retelling stories about art that inspired us. So even though they burned it, that Trojan horse lives on. It brings a smile to my face, the grandeur of it, the ridiculous nature of it, and how they got all these people to participate. It's like, you could say the same thing about theater. When the play's over, it's not
About
like
what?
film, like theater.
Theater.
You go to live
right.
theater, and then when it's over, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
They close up the show and work on another production. It's not like making film where it's archived. So, but it lives on in everyone's minds. Like they say, we all die and disappear, but if we touch people along the way that are alive after we're gone, if we have children that, we've influenced and created a positive influence, then each generation, you continue in the minds of those people long after you're gone. And so the art continues as well.
Mm.
And so even though it seems silly, it's not. It makes it more valuable.
Mm.
Right? The scarcity of that art now is what adds value to it.
Mm.
I mean, not everybody got to see that. It didn't get, that cheapens it maybe.
Why did
Also,
you say why did you say it cheapens it?
Preserving it. If they had brought it back every year and more people got to see it, then eventually it will become cliche. It'll become, an anachronism. So the beauty of what makes it special is you and I had to go there to experience it. We're not able to take the experience and show it to everyone. Broadcast it, videotape it, document it, re-show it, make copies of it. So some of the value is that we experienced it firsthand. It was a personal thing. The art was personal, it was interpersonal, and now it's gone. And so it lives on in our mind, which maybe is even more powerful or valuable than the materialistic thing that it was. It was an idea, and ideas are powerful. So the idea kept going. So at first it seems like, why would you expend all that energy to build something and then destroy it? but maybe it's not so silly.
Mm.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
no, I grapple with that idea
Yeah,
because on the one hand, I appreciate the symbolism of impermanence. Hence why I
yeah,
love Burning Man, right? Like literally, it's in the name, Burning Man. Like you build this ridiculous structures, and by the end of the week, you burn it. I love that symbolism. At the same time, I also think about, well, what if we do capture it? What if we do minimize it and such that we can distribute to more people, such that more people can experience maybe not the full scale of the meaning of the grandeur, but they can experience partial grandeur, let's say, right? Because after all, if you look at the works of Shakespeare or whoever, right, we preserve their work and their work lived on even after hundreds or thousands of years.
right,
So, I kind of grapple with that because part of it is impact,
right.
emotional impact, and part of it is also distribution of the benefit. So I don't certainly have an answer here. What I tend to do as a technologist, as a cerebralist, I tend to lean towards more of the the distribution side
Yeah,
versus. But I do appreciate more and more as I grow older. The peak experience is also super important as well.
yeah. So I think that the the reproduction is a cold medium, and one of the precepts of Burning Man is is that it's participatory, right? That
Mm,
it's interactive, and it's also more primal. And so, for instance, theater survives even though we now have film. Film has evolved from theater, right? They started, you know, recording what was happening on stage, and that was the early films were all stage productions.
hmm
And then film has become its own art form that can be easily commodified. So another thing at Burning Man is about decommodification. So when you can replicate it, you can commodify it. So this way it limits
hmm
the commodification of the experience. But you're right, not everyone's going to be able to experience Burning Man. But
Right.
maybe they will because you and I leave Burning Man and we take a piece of it with us in our heart, in our head, and then we influence people, we give back to our communities in ways that we learned about giving at Burning Man. So
So
I think that's where the positive aspects are because we can't just show it to them. We can't show them the video. Okay, we're not supposed to show them the video. We're not supposed to duplicate the art outside of Burning Man. But what we do is we on a personal level we affect people in our default worlds.
so I want to ask you this question because if I zoom out, right, look at the ridiculous of Burning Man, of the symbolism of impermanence. If I zoom out, I mean that's really our life. Shakespeare said it so well. He said, "Life is a stage, and we're nothing but actors and characters."
Right.
So if I look at it from that view, how can I be more ridiculous? And that comes to mind, right? Because I don't want to just be a mediocre side character. I want to actually shine my light and just be as ridiculous as I can in life, right? However, other people may view this as a caricature of the play, but that's part of having interesting conversations with interesting people is so that I can give me myself more permission to be more ridiculous. Anyway, um, a little
There's
bit of
definitely a lot of that at Burning Man.
yeah, but I wanted to ask you this question because in many ways you're very dedicated to be as quote unquote ridiculous as possible, right? You design 33 cutting edge prototype flight vehicles, including rockets and aircrafts and things like that, spaceships. Most people don't do that. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into that and what inspired you to be as I'm using that word playfully. I hope you get as ridiculous as possible in that realm.
Yeah, well, I think playful definitely hits upon it. It's the difference, I guess, between work and a career is are you playing when you're doing it? When you go to work, if it feels like play, then that's a career. because it's a passion, right? It's something you want to do. And I've always loved everything about flying. At an early age, I was building model airplanes, model rockets, playing frisbee, anything that flies, birds, myself. I started taking flying lessons, ride my bike to the airport to take flying lessons. So it's just a passion about, I'm flying has certain metaphors that are associated with, freedom and the three-dimensional nature of it. It's often inspiring even to people that don't fly or like to fly planes, but it's an easy thing to identify with. And the reason is because it's liberating, it's transportation, all those things that it implies. Adventure, danger, speed, it's all of those things. It's different perspectives. You go up and you look down. I mean, you see everything so different than 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, we were walking around on the planet. Why is it so cool to climb a mountain and look down off the ridge? The airplane provides that same kind of perspective. And so it's liberating. It's inspiring.
So my PhD advisor, who is no longer with us right now, but his pastime hobbies were aeronautics. Yeah. And when I first found out about that, I was very surprised. Well, because he, like me, is a nerd. And then I was like, what? You're interested in what? Acrobatics through air flights. And now I understand more, because you get to push the edge of that, as you said, freedom, adventure, and different perspective, and put yourself in that flow state, right?
Right.
So out of all kinds of different flying experiences, do you have a preferred modality like my advisor did, aeronautics, things like that?
How do you mean?
I'm making an assumption here. So there's probably different kinds of flying, right? The easy cruiser versus aeronautics, do extreme things. Are there different kind of things that you're really into?
Yeah, I hate the herd mentality. I don't like queuing up in lines. I don't like going through the TSA. I don't like being told how fast I can drive. There's something very libertarian or freeing about getting in the plane, going from A to B on your own schedule whenever you want. Driving a car is similar, but surprisingly there's less licensing and limits on flying to some extent, at least when you get outside of major metropolitan areas. You can travel all across the country in an airplane and never talk to anybody. You don't need permission to take off and land at most airports because they're uncontrolled. And it can be very adventurous. You can go into the outback. You can go into a field or a grass airstrip, or land on a mesa, or in a helicopter, you can land on a ridge without any runway. And you can get to very remote places. I've got friends who spend months every year just camping out of their airplane in Idaho, Montana, just traveling in the wilderness to places you can't get to in a car, or it's difficult in a four-wheeler.
Wow, this is a new concept. Actually, I heard about RVing to places that you want to go. I've never heard of camping out of your airplane. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got a friend, Ramona. Her website is something, it's Sky Chick is her handle, but if you look that up. And she spends often 3-4 months in, just hunting and fishing and living out of her, camping out of the back of her airplane, or in a tent under the wing of her airplane in very remote places. And, you can obviously sightsee into mind-bogglingly cool places that would be very difficult to get to otherwise. Cover a lot of territory. Yeah, you can transport yourself. It's modern flying in a small plane is a lot like Magellan or someone exploring in a sailboat, right? There's still wildernesses out there that are very inaccessible. And maybe maybe they're not unexplored, but it's an adventure to get there. And so it has that similar feeling like you would getting on a sailboat, where you're pretty much suddenly the stakes seem, a lot of times you go camping, even car camping, there's a heightened sense that you suddenly feel your vulnerability and a responsibility, like, I can only eat what I carried with me or what I can find in the woods, kind of that sensation of sort of a primal thing. We get spoiled where you just go to the refrigerator or the grocery store and the food comes out like magic, and you get in your car and turn the key and, go from A to B on paved roads. So I think going in the outback, traveling by plane is a bit of an adventure. I liken it to, at least in a small plane that's not pressurized, it's a lot like traveling cross country by motorcycle. You're subject to the weather, unlike a jet that goes way up above, pressurized jet, where you go above it and they fly right through the weather in just a matter of minutes. They punch through all of the storms, get up on top, get you to where you're going. It's a totally different concept. So there's elements of air travel that can be very adventurous. Low and slow. A lot of people enjoy that. So I've had a lot of fun. There's like a magic distance that's, my plane's not fast enough that I would fly to the East Coast. I mean, I could, but it would, much like driving in a car, it'd take more than a day. So it's quite an adventure doing that. But I can jump on the plane and go have brunch in Sedona and then come back to California on the same day. Whereas you just couldn't do that in a car. So it's expanded the radius of my weekend explorations. I can go to Death Valley and land out there and have breakfast and come back, and then go to Santa Barbara and have dinner and then come back. So you can go from the mountains to the desert, fly up to Mammoth. So it's empowering and a bit liberating.
One of the things we talk on the podcast quite a lot is about extending the range of our comfort zone.
Right.
And I think having a technology like an airplane, as you said, extends your range of like thinking about what's possible to do. Because the thought would never cross my mind. I'm just gonna go have breakfast in Santa Barbara and then come back. but having a plane, I'm like, oh yeah, it's normal. It's not a big deal.
Right. And there's definitely a challenge to that. Is you've got to check the weather. You can put yourself in serious danger if you don't do that. And then you've got to interpret the weather. And then there's always a risk, because not only does the weather have some variables in accuracy, but there's personal limits in your skill and experience and the capabilities of the airplane to be able to transition. If the weather's marginal, and there could be the risk of freezing rain at altitude. You're dealing with a lot more climate than you do on the ground that could be life-threatening. And so it's a personal challenge in that sense, much like rock climbing can be very an intellectual thing. It's not just sitting on your butt and pushing the go button.
So I have a question there, right? Because what's that guy's name? JFK's son. Anyways, he was a new pilot. He went up. He was overconfident. He misread the weather or the system or whatever, and then drove to his death, right? So
yeah, Chesapeake Bay or whatever. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, it was like Chesapeake Bay or something.
Something like that, right?
Yeah, East Coast.
And so, as you said earlier, it's about checking the weather, checking the system, checking with your own ability, also checking with your mental state, right? And then you're riding on the edge of danger and safety. So I'm curious to know your point of view, because in my mind, again, a layman, not a pilot, obviously, it's dangerous to fly. That's my perception. So as you do all these type of different adventures, tell us a little bit more about the sense of danger or impermanence. Like, keep that in mind such that you're still having fun doing it at the edge of the flow zone, but also not pushing yourself to over the edge, so to speak.
Yeah, it's definitely something that there's always more. You can always do more. Fly higher, faster, farther, into more uncertainty. If you're flying cross country, you could catch up to the weather. Like a line of thunderstorms that are over the Midwest. Well, it's sunny here, but where you're going, it's not. And so there's a lot of mental challenges to what strategy am I going to use? Do I leave earlier, or do I actually leave later and let the storm pass and not catch up to it? Do I try and thread a needle and go under it or between storms cells? Am I going to scare my passengers? Am I putting them at risk? They all are relying on me to keep them safe. So there's a lot of mental gymnastics there, and also it's very stimulating to push yourself. As you learn and gain experience, you can take on more risk, but it's a calculated risk. If you're in a single engine airplane and the engine quits, you better find a place to land while you're gliding, right? But you're not going to go that far, so you better have an option always in the back of your mind, right? And so they say there's bold pilots and there's old pilots, but there's no old bold pilots. So it's about measuring the risk, just like riding a motorcycle. If you ride around the city in traffic, there's a good chance someone's going to make a left into you and T-bone you, and you could get hurt, right? Much worse than you would in a car. But there's also the excitement of the adventure of riding a motorcycle, and the being able to lean the bike and the acceleration and all that. The airplane offers the same kinds of, you're on the edge. It's a calculated risk. You can take little or as much risk as you want because there's so much freedom, right? You can play it really safe and only fly on good days, and only go with someone, maybe you always fly with another pilot so that there's two of you to help make decisions and do weather planning, or maybe you're prefer to, go it alone. And so your decisions have consequences, much like going out in the desert and only bringing one canteen of water. It's like you can make stupid decisions and you can put yourself at much greater risk. And so there's something exciting about owning up to that personal responsibility. It makes you feel alive when you realize that, it's amazing how hard it is to kill someone, and how easy it is. It seems like sort of a weird parabolic function. Like you can sort of be in the middle and never take much risk and never subject yourself to, it's like making choices about which put in your body or which put in your mouth or how much sunshine you get. You could get sunburn. Flying can be the same thing. You can make choices, but they have dire consequences. When your engine quits in your car, you just coast over to the shoulder. In an airplane, you better have adequate training to make the appropriate decision about, is there an airport nearby within gliding distance? Is there a field? Is there a road that I can go land on? Did the engine quit because of icing? Can I restart the engine at a different altitude after I get out of this moist, cold air? So there's a lot of intellectual gymnastics going on. Problem solving, it's fun, to like challenge yourself personally and stay on that threshold. Challenge.
I can start to see a little bit of a theme between Burning Man and the love for flying now.
And they have consequences, right? It's like there's an adventure, there's a cost benefit trade you're making all the time. If you do nothing, you don't have the fun, but you go do this at an increased risk.
So let's segue a little bit to actually designing flight vehicles. So now you love flying, you love adventures, you love freedom. Now you're designing for others. You have designed over 33, prototype flight vehicles, which is tremendous. Like, wow, you're for sure dedicated to this.
Just to be clear, I didn't design all 33 of those. I participated in all of those, and intimately in most cases. Like I was a serious contributor, but yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you take this mental model of being responsible but still push the envelope into the design realm of flight vehicles.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I enjoy about aircraft design, most of the stuff I've done has been rapid prototypes. So I've worked very little on production aircraft. It's all like record-setting airplanes, one-offs, and so it's usually a very tight schedule. And it kind of, I think an analogy would be like maybe an art project for Burning Man, where you've got, 1 year, you've decided to do something, now you've got to complete it. You can't do it alone because it's a massive project, both technically and physically. So you've got to collaborate with a lot of people. You've got to communicate with those people. It requires leadership that's inspiring, to get people all running in the same direction, to align all those vectors of productivity. And then the payoff is like that first flight, which is very risky. And it's very transitory. You can't go back and redo the first flight. You only get one first flight. And there's a high risk there. And then hopefully you burn off that risk if it's successful with subsequent flights. But that's part of the big payoff, is collaborating on something and then seeing it fly, which just seems like magic, right? It's defying gravity and doing unexpected things, or performing in a way that's envelope pushing, right? Someone said you can't go this fast with this kind of airplane, or you can't make an airplane that'll fly around the world nonstop unrefueled. Well, I worked on a project that did that.
So actually, pause for a moment. Can you bring us back to, again, watching your life on a movie screen? Can you give us a moment where one of your vehicles or crafts that actually broke a record and then brings a tear of joy or whatever it is, for you? Just bring us back to that moment, please.
So probably one of the most personal aircraft projects was the Virgin Galactic White Knight 2 and the spaceship program. We started that program in 2006. I was working for a small company called Scaled Composites, and we were contracted by Richard Branson to design, build, and flight test those vehicles. And that was inspired by a previous program we had done, which was Spaceship One, which was, the goal of that was to win the X Prize, which was to build a spaceship that could go into space, which is defined as 100 kilometers, 328,000 feet, and do it twice in 2-week time frames. So it had to be reusable. You had to turn it around, fly it again within 2 weeks, and it had to carry 3 people to space. And the inspiration was, it was started by a guy named Peter Diamandis, who's a remarkable human. Yeah. And so the X Prize was to motivate and spawn commercial space tourism, or just, NASA is a remarkable technical organization, but they just don't inspire people. They take something that's really cool and make it super boring. The going to the moon should have been like the coolest thing ever, but it's kind of like, I don't know, they somehow ruined it, right? Even for people like me who are passionate about aerospace, they spoiled it somehow. They just made it dry and technical, and you've got to be an uber nerd to really still love what happened there. I mean, you can appreciate it, but they somehow took the excitement out of it, right? And so, and then they also, it kind of ended. Like, people were like, well, what's the point of driving golf carts on the moon? There was kind of the response. It seemed like a waste of money. We would rather spend money trying to find our oil under somebody else's sand, and fighting wars over that. It's strange what we decide is important and what's not important. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So it's some of it, especially once you leave the atmosphere, it's about exploration again. And the challenge is not everybody gets to go. There's a couple of explorers that get that privilege. And so it's hard to, when it's democratic nation that's publicly funding it, it's hard to keep that enthusiasm up. I think, the older explorers were funded by kings who had unilateral control over how to spend that money. And there were probably a lot of profit motivations back then too. So that's where I guess commercial space tourism comes in. Is there can you monetize it? Can you capitalize it? Can you mine asteroids? Can you build things in space? Can you harvest energy out there and bring it back? And that's something the commercial world's going to do, not government. Government's got the deep pockets to maybe do the initial exploration. But so the X Prize was a great opportunity to motivate people to get into that. And subsequently, there's been, everybody's doing it now, right? Blue Origin, SpaceX, etc. So that's great. That's become hopefully a booming industry that succeeds, that expands our world beyond just our atmosphere. Richard Branson was inspired by the X Prize, and came to us and wanted us to basically scale that vehicle up quite a bit so that it could carry passengers. And I had the opportunity to lead the team and design the mothership and the whole spaceship mothership configuration. And so we developed that very rapid paced, ambitious budget and schedule. And we built the mothership in 2.5 years. And then the spaceship started flight testing about 1.5 years later after that. So we had the mothership flying, and then we were able to get the spaceship going and start doing glide flights and then powered rocket flights subsequently. And to work with friends and collaborate and work really hard on something, just 12-hour days, 6 days a week for a couple of years, and then to be able to be involved as a co-pilot in flight test on that vehicle was just, just a peak experience for me, to realize that I'm flying in something that I designed.
Tell us more about that. Like, how does that feel?
Scary. not because I lack confidence in my design, but just, flight testing in general is, you wake up in the morning, go to work at, dark 100, 2 a.m., have a flight briefing, get in the cockpit at 3 a.m. You take off right as the sun crests the horizon, before the winds pick up, and you get butterflies, and you're thinking, I may not go home to my family tonight. I may never see them again. What should I do? Should I wake them up and kiss them goodbye? Should I have said something last night? It's intense. It's a real adrenaline rush.
I asked that question specifically because you're at the edge of the flow state, right?
Yeah.
One step over, you're off the cliff. Step over here, you're too safe. You don't get to that flow state. And in my mind, I see this inner tension between that. And as you said earlier, do I say goodbye to my kids or do I not?
Yeah.
There's that internal grappling because you're not just responsible for yourself. You now also have other people who depend on you. Moments like this is what I'd like to discuss on this podcast because people think living a purpose-driven life is obvious, it's easy, but often it's not because it's in the micro moments where you grapple with things. That's where you lean into your purpose. So
right.
Tell us a little bit more, unpack that if you don't mind, choosing your passion, your dharma, your career, your synchronicity, this thing that drives you to keep pushing the envelope in spite of your fear, in spite of your responsibility and all these other things, to your attachment to other things that's in your life.
So I think we have as much responsibility to our passion as we do other people. And that is you've got to walk a balance there, I guess, right? And it's, should I not ride my bike to work because it's more dangerous than driving my car to work in the city? Because I enjoy bike riding. It's like I know a lot of people who they get married and their spouse convinces them to sell the motorcycle because they're not a bachelor anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You've got responsibilities. Is
Mm-hmm.
that the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, but if it's your career choice, it's not just some sort of extracurricular thrill that you're seeking. This is what gives you purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to follow that. That's important. And it may be what killed you. It may be what kills you, but something's going to kill you. It might as well be something you're passionate about.
That's
You
a
know?
quotable quote. I like it.
Thanks. Right? I mean, it's kind of like risking failure when you're doing something as an entrepreneur or just designing something. I worked at a place that where we did all these prototypes. It was strongly encouraged to hurry up and fuck it up so you can fix it. Was the saying. In other words, you were encouraged to failing was not failing. It was fail up or whatever you want to say. The cliche is you definitely get points for trying, and succeeding comes from trying over and over again and not being dissuaded from the setbacks. So I mean, you got to be smart about it. Obviously, you can keep trying something stupidly and expecting a different result, but there's definitely a method to, it's like Edison trying all the different kinds of materials for filaments, right? For light bulbs. He tried hundreds and hundreds. He just kind of brute forced it, shotgun approach to development. And one of the interesting things in my early career at Scale Composites was our quality control was that the guy that was the project engineer, which would be kind of like the chief engineer on a project, it was usually most of the engineers were pilots. It's just kind of our culture. And usually that person, that project engineer that led the program and the design, was either the test pilot or the co-pilot on the first flight. So talk about quality control. You're making life or death decisions about doing a trade between strength and weight and minimizing material to make the performance good. And you're also saying, well, if the wing breaks in the first flight because of turbulence, it's going to kill me, So it's like, that's the insurance, right? And it's
You're putting your
simple. It's
life
like,
at stake, your own life at stake.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But
Mm-hmm.
so you don't want to die,
Mm-hmm.
but you also don't want to build a shitty product that's too heavy, that doesn't have any payload capacity, right? That doesn't meet the performance specs. So you're challenged in every way, both personally, physically, as well as mentally to achieve that goal. And that's about putting skin in the game. And even though I wasn't an owner in the company, I always felt like I had skin in the game in my projects quite often. That either I was going to fly on that thing on the first flight or someone I knew, a close friend was. And so it's a lot what motivates entrepreneurs, is that there's a reward, there's a risk and a reward.
There's so many things I could ask, but I'm also cognizant of time as well. I'm grappling internally of where to take this conversation to.
Well, you're doing a great job because I feel like this has been very free form, and you're doing a good job of.
Oh, thank you.
Of guiding our discussion. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Oh, thank you. I'll bring it to something that's outside of flights, but I want to use the same mental model still, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you're birthing a new idea, from an idea to a product to the world, right? And as you said, there's a certain thrill of witnessing that birthing process coming to place, and probably use the product yourself, probably seeing other people using it. There's certain thrill, certain satisfaction that comes with that. And there's also responsibility that comes with that as well. We want to make sure that this thing performs better than others. At the same time, we also don't want it to have certain cost, certain ramification that we didn't think about and harm someone else, let's say, right? So there's that edge of pushing the limit. So how can we concretize? Because for you is about pushing the envelope, and that's someone have a vision, you are the Navy SEAL team to bring that to reality.
Yeah. I like to think that you don't know where the edge is unless you walk up to the edge.
Okay, so say more about that, please.
Well, it's just, when you're on a plateau, on a cliff, you don't know where the edge is until you walk right to the edge. You don't feel that anxiety of falling until you get very close to the edge. It's amazing. It's not much more dangerous to stand a foot from the edge than to stand 2 feet from the edge. But the fear factor and the realization that you could fall when your center of gravity is close enough to, if I were to lay down right now, I might fall over the edge, versus if I'm 6 feet from the edge and I fall down, if I trip, I'm going to land on the top of this cliff where I'm standing already. If I stand on the edge and I trip and fall, I'm going to fall down, 1,000 feet. And it's that last little bit that makes a huge difference. And you don't know where that is until you go there. It's kind of like the hardest part of the last 1% takes 50% of the time, kind of thing. It's about defining the boundary. The boundary is the interesting place to be.
So when someone comes to you and say, hey, I want to bring this I want to push an envelope in the aircraft world.
Yeah.
And you can pick whoever you want, right? You're picking your Navy SEAL team together. So so tell us a little bit about the selection criteria of how you pick those people. If you can make a meta framework about that.
Well, I guess qualities that I admire that I want on my team are people that are willing to learn, that are self-starters. So in other words, they can either be shown a goal or they identify the problems themselves in their area. So everyone's working for one big goal, but there's a lot of little milestone hurdles that a lot of them unforeseen, right? The unknown unknowns. And everybody is looking for those pitfalls and those risks in their own way and stretching themselves physically and mentally to learn what they need to do to mitigate those risks, because it wouldn't be a challenge if there wasn't risk. And so everybody is trying to identify the risks so that they don't become gotchas too late that can, terminate a project from being successful. And so you look for people that are both creative or smart or experienced that can identify those pitfalls and that are willing also to grow, because again, if it's all predictable, then it wouldn't have been a challenge in the first place, and it wouldn't, maybe not worth doing. It's not a prototype, for instance, or a new industry or a new something. So every member should be willing to stretch their horizons. It's kind of what's fun about, spitballing ideas or brainstorming, right? Is you're challenging your mind. I've heard it said that when you're doing a creative session where you're brainstorming, if somebody doesn't laugh, you're not trying hard enough, because the laughter is a sign of nervousness where someone's outside their comfort zone, right? It's a way of dealing with the stress. And so that's how you're like actually breaking new ground, as you make people feel uncomfortable.
Interesting. I like to bring back the being ridiculous point.
Sure.
Because part of innovation is so ridiculous that it's laughable.
Right.
Whether it's out of ridiculousness or out of nervousness, you're like,
right.
I don't know if we could do that. Yeah. So, what about the dynamics of the team? How do you navigate? Because you're pushing the envelope. And as you know, whether it's physicality, creativity, mentality, psychology, spirituality, it gets intense, right? So how do you manage that dynamism, the dynamics between the team members as you're pushing the envelopes together? Does that make sense?
Yes, but I'm not sure I know how to answer that.
Is there a meta framework that you use? Like, hey, let me make sure I'm pushing this person always at the edge of their comfort zone versus letting them be comfortable. Is there a specific thing that a trick or a ritual that you use as a way to motivate them to be at the edge of their comfort zone?
Humor often works.
Okay.
Like
Say
you
more about
said,
that.
well, it's just, they say that humor is always at the expense of, at the pain of someone else, almost always. You think of like physical humor is usually some kind of pratfall, right? It's Buster Keaton falling down, or the tramp, almost getting run over by a car and stepping on a rake, whatever. It's humor is a way to, it kind of builds connection, and it's like a great equalizer from an ego standpoint. It kind of breaks down it's kind of like when you have a good comrade, you tease them, like in a buddy movie when there's two different characters of different ethnicities, and they're just constantly throwing epithets at each other about their race or something, or their gender or something, and they don't mean it. It's just a way of showing, it's a way of breaking down ego and saying we're all, let's put all that aside. So I think humor in a project is a good way to relieve stress. Something I've incorporated in engineering meetings myself is I've challenged my engineers to, they have to express when they have a gripe, they have to express it in the form of a haiku. So we would have meetings where we'd all read each other's, we'd all get up and read our haikus, or a lot of times they ended up being in PowerPoints, right? So there'd be a graphical element as well, kind of a multimedia presentation.
Oh man.
So let's say the propulsion engineer is having trouble sourcing the turbine engines for the airplane because the vendor won't give them a non-disclosure agreement because of some export licensing thing, whatever, some technical. So he's frustrated, right? It shouldn't be a problem. He's an engineer. He doesn't want to deal with the bureaucracy of, some export licensing thing that the State Department has. So he expresses his frustration in the form of a haiku. And I think it's a lot of fun for engineers to do that because a haiku is very structured, and engineers like problem solving. It's a puzzle, right? There's rules, and then you work within those rules, and then there's an opportunity for creativity. And then you can also make an ass out of yourself and be a clown in front of everyone and get a good laugh out of it. And by the time you've sat down and thought about the haiku long enough to express your gripe, usually you've come to terms with it, and it's kind of like you've reached a state, you're at peace with it now. Like by the time even before you present it to anyone, you've thought about it, you've meditated on it, you've broken it down, and it's kind of it's very cathartic, and we've had a lot of fun with it. So that's kind of, usually most of them ended up being comical. Everyone took the opportunity to kind of one up each other with something funny in their haiku. And the gripes ended up being a lot of fun rather than, a pissing contest of finger pointing.
Thank you for that. That's innovative. I've never heard that before. I really like it, well, for its inventiveness, but also if I think about how do we actually reconcile the internal grappling that's within each and every one of us?
Yeah.
I think having a structure like a haiku, as you said, provide that emotional distance. And then we go back to it. It's like exposure therapy, right? You go back to it, think about it, chewing on it, meditate on it. And by the time we're ready to find the words that allows us to express our emotions in the way that we wanted to do it precisely, we already have resolved or integrated this internal negative emotion that we have about it. Yeah, that's really, really great. Do you mind switch direction a little bit, talking about psychedelics?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. So part of, I think, what makes an innovator inventive is their ability or their flexibility of the way they think about problems, right? So because traditionally you just think about a problem this way, but I think what makes an innovator innovative is the ability to look at it from different points of view, bring out their expertise and different things. So I'm an advocate for psychedelics for that reason as well. So curious to know your practice, or how do you have used psychedelics or have seen others use psychedelics as a way to foster that perspective change, that innovativeness, that inventiveness.
One analogy is kind of like the one I described, where flying gives you a different perspective. The cliche when you die and you rise out of your body and you look down at it in the room, that kind of thing, seems like sort of a hallucinogenic experience. But I think, the cliche aside, it really does give you the ability to take you out of maybe it puts you, it's about being present, maybe even more so than a lot of our lives we spend thinking about the past, and that brings on depression. Thinking about the future brings on anxiety. And being present, I think hallucinogenic experiences can help you become more present and in the now, which is really about being in the flow state, right? It's about, you get it's like heightened reality. I don't think of hallucinogenics as being altered reality. I think it's hyper reality. It's about being aware of details that you don't usually see or hear, and it's all there, but your brain filters it, and this thing turns down the filters. And so now you're extremely present, maybe much like you would when you're meditating. And that focus can be transformative. It can break down your ego, and it can give you a sense of your place. It's very often challenging to, you go in and out of existential thoughts of what's my purpose, where am I going, am I living a meaningful life, is that just a construct, is there even such a thing, is it just a waste of time, am I just some biological thing, a bunch of cells just clawing at trying to stay alive, or do I have purpose? And I think you can get some answers to all of those things from a hallucinogenic experience, and not necessarily the ones you want, but maybe you become at peace with accepting the fact that, I don't have a divine purpose, or maybe I do. But being very present gives you the opportunity to explore that personally. And it's also about being on the edge and challenging yourself mentally and sometimes physically. It's about accepting it's a place it can be very uncomfortable mentally, because it's unfamiliar terrain. It's like traveling to a foreign country where the culture, the language, everything is different. And some people love that kind of experience and some people don't. So if you love that kind of experience, I think hallucinogenics is similar to that, in that you've immersed yourself in something that is letting you know that your way is just one way, and there's an awful lot of people moving through space in a way much different than you. And they're successful in their own way at doing things their way. Their culture, their language, their philosophy, their way of communicating love, all those things. And so I think a hallucinogenic experience can often be transformative like that, where you come out feeling schooled, right?
The school of hyper reality.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
Yeah. 100%.
I mean, they call it tripping for a reason, right? You're going on an adventure, a travel. It can be educational. It can be fun. It can be both. It can be scary.
Mm-hmm.
It can be uncomfortable. Sometimes it's good to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, part of the theme of this podcast is about leaning to your discomfort.
Right.
That's hence the word noble warrior, right?
Right.
The
Yeah.
people
Tim
that,
Ferriss talks about don't define your goals, define your fears.
and who do we get to be as we lean into our discomfort? That to me is the payoff of being that discomfort. Because in my younger days, I would say I wanted the outcome. Hence why, in order to get the outcome, I lean into my discomfort. But my priority was the outcome. But these days, for me personally, it's more about who do I get to be as I'm leaning to my discomfort. Because oftentimes, let's use psychedelic experience or Burning Man or entrepreneurship or being on a podcast. A lot of times it's uncomfortable for me to be at the edge, but I do it because it allows me to, test myself. Like, who do I get to be in spite of discomfort, right? Who do I get
Yeah.
to be when I'm being pummeled by my sparring partner?
Another interesting way to look at it is they say, everyone agrees, life is hard. It's not always going to be happy. And I mean, everyone experiences hardship in their life. It's a bunch of organisms. It's the animal kingdom. It's who eats who and where you are in the pecking order and all that, the dog eat dog nature. And when we choose a lifestyle or a career, it's about choosing which thing is the least painful. So, no job or career is without suffering or pain or hardship, but it's one that you choose. So in other words, it's a pain that you're comfortable with. So it's about getting comfortable with the kind of pain that you like. So if you enjoy, if you want to be a professional tennis player, then you probably want to work out every day for hours and whack thousands of balls, and spend, travel or whatever the discomforts are to being a professional athlete. Lots of travel, lots of exercise, grueling, running, the strenuous stuff, getting up early. But to them, that's they enjoy that kind of pain. They chose that pain. And I think all of us do that, whatever that career choice or life choice is, it's about choosing the pain where we can get comfortable with or a discomfort. And if I circle back to the hallucinogenics, it's about getting comfortable with being in unfamiliar environment, which in itself can be painful or uncomfortable to some extent.
Yeah. I want to underline what you just said. I thought was very profound. Is choose the pain of your own choosing.
Yeah.
Because I think, how do I unpack that? We always get some kind of payoff, or there's always some kind of cost to any kind of actions or decisions that we make, right? Whether it's a career you want to get into, or a relationship you want to get into, or a community you want to get into, or activity that you want to get into, there's always a payoff and a cost to that, in my mind, in the way I think about it. So if that's the case, what is the pain or the cost of my own choosing? And as you said, as a professional athlete, there are certain things you got to do every day, right? As a podcaster, there are certain things you got to do, right? That you don't necessarily like. There, in being in relationship, there's certain things you got to do you may not necessarily like. And so, what is the pain of your own choosing, such that net is positive for you, that you get so much enjoyment, satisfaction, fulfillment out of it, that you're willing to pay that price? Is that an accurate way to recap what you said?
Absolutely. Like some people would not think getting a PhD is any kind of pain they would want to put themselves through, but that was something that you chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm sure it was challenging, otherwise everyone could do it, right?
Yep, for sure it was challenging.
So it was hard. And,
for sure.
Right. And so everybody chooses their pain.
Mm-hmm.
To them, it was worth it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kilo, we talked about a lot of different things. We talked about
Yes.
Burning Man. We talked about your love of flights. We talked about managing or recruiting a team of Navy SEAL innovators, managing the dynamics, a little bit about psychedelics, a little bit about choosing a purpose driven life. Out of everything that we had talked about, if there's one action that people are inspired by the way you think, what's one action that they could take to live a more purpose driven life from your point of view? One action.
Embrace discomfort and challenge yourself, be it through creativity or hard work or comedy. You know, any of those things can be uncomfortable, and they're all well worth the investment.
Mm, beautiful. Now, for people who are interested in following with what you do, what you're up to, where should we send them to?
So my current passion is the Anglerbot, which is a industrial robot used for camera motion control in film, and that's a venture that I started with my daughter, who's a film director. So it's the two of us have this company, and it's Sonder Films, and you can look up on Instagram or our website, anglerbot.com, or just look up Anglerbot. Angler like the fish.
Oh, make sure that it's in the show notes. Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Beautiful.
So that's kind of that's my current passion. I'm still, flying and tinkering in aerospace as well.
Beautiful, my friend. Thank you so much for your generosity, sharing with us your stories, and share with us some of behind the scenes of what it actually took to bring White Knight 2, beyond the atmosphere. There's so many more things I do wanted to get into with you. So I hope that we get a chance to do part 2 or part 3 of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, hopefully maybe we can share a drink sometime with our COVID masks and a straw.